Easy Explained, Kant's Groundwork, First Section. And the subtitle for this section is Transition from Common to Philosophical Moral Rational Cognition. He's saying a lot, that's quite a mouthful, but essentially that means what Kant's project is here is that he's trying to move from what he thinks is the common, more popular understanding and way of thinking about morals and ethics at the time, and he's going to suggest a more philosophical way to think about it his way, right? He's going to start proposing his ethical theory here. We're going to start to make that shift. We're going to start to make that transition. So in the early parts of the first section, just some quotes that I think Kant feels are easier to grasp and are also concepts that really no one at the time would disagree with. He thinks they're commonly held ethical beliefs. So for starters, he says to preserve one's life is one's duty. Pretty straightforward. Doesn't think anyone would disagree with that. He also says to secure one's own happiness is one's duty. Pursuit of happiness, right? The search for happiness. We want to keep ourselves alive and we want to be happy doing so, right? So he doesn't think these are too far-fetched. He then goes on to say all human beings have already of their own the most powerful and intimate inclination to happiness. So he's essentially saying this is human nature, right? We want to strive, we want to be happy, we want to achieve the things that we want in life. He doesn't think these are too out of place. So from there, that being his starting point, he is as we move into the second half of the first section, he's going to start to talk more philosophically, right? Start to propose his own theory. And he's going to do so with three propositions. The first one is actually still up to scholarly debate. Kant never explicitly states what his first proposition is. There's some kind of finger pointing and trying to figure out what exactly it was based on the coursework I've taken and my own reading. I think this is pretty close to what his first proposition here, as we start to layer these things he's already set out from the beginning. So Kant says there still remains a law, namely to advance one's happiness, not from inclination but from duty. And it's not until then that his conduct has its actual moral worth. So here, what Kant starts to get into is layering these concepts, right? We can all agree that we want to be happy. We can all agree that we have certain duties in this life. He's going to put the layer of them starting to be like a law on there, and it's from these things that we're actually finding our moral worth. So moving on to the second proposition, and this is one that is not up to scholarly debate, and Kant explicitly names it as such. Kant says an action from duty has its moral worth, not in the purpose that is to be attained by it, but in the maxim according to which it is resolved upon, and thus it does not depend on the actuality of the object of the action, but merely on the principle of willing according to which, regardless of any object of the desiderative faculty, the action is done. So essentially what Kant is saying here is that the moral value, the moral worth of any action, any deed, really comes from the deed and the action itself, right? That's where he's going to put the moral value. Not so much what happens afterwards, not so much the consequences, but on what you're actually doing, right? Your will that's involved there, what the action itself is, the nature of that action. And move on to his third proposition. Again, no scholarly debate here. This is clear. Kant says duty is the necessity of an action from respect for the law, right? This is pretty short and sweet. We're starting to see the layers really coming into play there. And this is where we start to see him also turn to what he's going to spend more time in the second section. But here at the end of the first section, he also introduces his concept of the universal moral law. You may have heard of this before. This is a big idea for Kant. We get a brief introduction to it here at the end of the first section. So Kant says, I ought never to proceed except in such a way that I could also will that my maxim should become a universal moral law. So essentially this means that we should be doing things, we should be acting in a way that if everybody were to do this, the whole world would still be okay, right? Society would be okay. This is acceptable for everyone to behave in such a way. This is the idea behind the universal moral law. And finally, for the first section here, Kant says the necessity of my actions from pure respect for the practical law is that which constitutes a duty, to which every other motivating ground must give way, because it is the condition of a will good in itself, whose worth surpasses everything. So again, looking at your actions, the moral value, the moral worth of your actions, if they're in line with the universal moral law, right? If you're doing the right things here, shouldn't have too much else to worry about, at least according to Kant and his ethical theory. That's it for the first section. We're going to continue into more on the universal moral law in the second section, but for now, I hope this helps.